Hello again, and thank you for tuning in. Now that we have seen an introduction to fractions that help us to understand how we can begin to think and talk about fractions, and we've looked at ways to potentially avoid some pitfalls or misconceptions, we can start doing math with our mathematicians. There are four different stages or activities that are outlined in this video, and they are intended to be done in the certain order. The first thing that we can do is partition holes into same size pieces. And this simply is you asking your mathematician to create a shape and then break it into a certain number of same size pieces. Here we have a hole that has been broken up into four same size pieces. If you ask them to break a piece into three same size pieces, you may see something, that looks like this. Maybe they'll draw a circle um, and break that up into three same size pieces. Maybe we can do halves. Some vocabulary, some words that you want to make sure that you're using are the words same size pieces. We want to refer to each of these as same size pieces, and make sure that you're referring to your shape as your whole. Once you feel that your mathematician has a pretty good grasp on that, we can move in to start naming those same size pieces. So as they make the shapes, they can actually name them. And once we name them, we can then start comparing fractions. So you want students to compare unit fractions. When we do this work, we're going to go ahead and just use these 5 unit fractions. So denominator 2, 4, 8 and denominator 3 and 6. As we're doing this work, we want to make sure we still use the words whole and same size pieces. We also want to make sure that we're referring to, in this case, the 1 of a unit fraction as the numerator. We want to make sure that we are referring to the bottom number as the denominator. We should be able to describe what that means, and we should be calling all of these unit fractions. When we're doing this work, it is really important that students are using manipulatives. So a manipulative is something that they can physically move around in space. We want to have unit fractions and fraction manipulatives that have been created that are accurate. Um, if you look on my website on the home page, there are some resources about manipulatives that you can use. If I am your child's teacher, you can contact me, directly or through Dojo, and I can help you get a hold of some manipulatives that you can use to do this work. So we want to compare um, these fractions, specifically which one is larger and which one is smaller. Initially, when students see these numbers, if you give them 1/2 and 1/4, what will often happen before they've done the work and used manipulatives, they're going to say that 1/4 is bigger, because what they have noticed is that the 4 is bigger than the 2. Therefore, 1/4 may be bigger. Similarly, they may say that 1/8 is larger than 1/4 because the 8 is larger than the 2. So they're going to need to get in there with the manipulatives and see for themselves and prove to themselves which one of these unit fractions is larger than the other. It would be helpful if we compared these 3 fractions, or you're comparing those 2 fractions. Do a deep dive just using either these fractions or these fractions to really build a strong understanding before we move on to more fractions. After the student can understand the relative sizes of unit fractions, we can move on to creating equivalent fractions. Again, we're going to limit our work to this with just the unit fractions 1/3 and 1/6, and fractions with the denominator 4, 2, and 8. So they'll start building fractions that are the same. So how many fourths does it take to make half, for instance? Well, that takes 2/4. How many eighths are there in 1/4? There are 2/8. And they can start making equivalent fractions and start experimenting, maybe doing things like this, but creating equivalent fractions and then naming the equivalent fractions. Please make sure that you are still using the same good vocabulary that we just covered in the previous slides. Once students are able to create and reason about equivalent fractions, the next activity you can do with them is to compare fractions. So for instance, They can talk about the relative sizes of, say, 2/3 and 3/6. Which one of those is larger? We're still limiting our work to fourths, halves, eighths, and thirds and sixths. One thing that you can do is present fractions like this to the student just with the numbers and ask them to hazard a guess. Which one of these do they think is larger? Which one do they think is smaller? And then after they have said which one they think is larger or smaller, have them prove it. Actually get 2/3, actually get 3/6. And then ask them to talk about, well, was their first guess or what they thought correct? Why or why not? And if we do these activities with the students, it will give them a very strong foundational understanding of fractions and the fraction works that they will do in the future. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.